up. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Cynthia Deeren and I'm the Managing Director of Deeren and Associates. I'm delighted to be with you today to present the topic JAFZA Wear Out. So today we're going to be talking about the Jebel Ali Free Zone, which is the largest free zone and tax-free zone in the world, and it is the gateway to the world. Before I get started though, I just would like to do a sound check so that I can make sure that everybody can actually hear me. So if you can hear me and the sound is fine, would you just mind typing into that comment box on the screen, yes, I can hear you, or sound is fine. And if you can't hear us, would you also mind typing into your comment box and just letting us know that the sound is actually not working out too well. So I don't have any comments coming up yet, but I will wait to hear from you guys, and you can actually let me know if you can hear or not. Oh, so Webby says I can't hear you. Okay, Webby, just wondering whether you have got your sound turned up. We will try and actually fix that up so that you can hear us. Just wondering whether anybody else can let us know whether or not they can hear us.
It's Kim Winter here. I can hear you okay.
Oh, Kim, hi. Welcome to the webinar.
Yep.
How are you doing?
Thank you, but I'm getting about a 15 to 20 second delay on everything that you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm hearing it again.
Okay, so there is a delay on the webinar. It broadcasts live after we actually start. All right, folks, so let's get started. I just want to do a few introductions and a brief overview today. So, as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about Jebel Ali Free Zone and why your company, in particular, why your Australian company should consider setting up there if you're exporting internationally. By the end of today's webinar, you should have a pretty clear idea of some of the following points. Firstly, why the UAE? We're going to be talking about why, if you're an Australian company, you might want to consider the UAE as a market that you're going to be setting up with in. Secondly, you should have a really clear idea of what the Jebel Ali Free Zone is. We're going to be going into that in quite some detail. Thirdly, you should be crystal clear on JAFZA, Jebel Ali Free Zone, and the UAE economy, and how JAFZA affects the UAE economy. Fourthly, we're going to talk about setting up at JAFZA and why and how you might want to go about doing that if you're thinking of going to the UAE. We're going to be chatting about logistics and infrastructure and how JAFZA links to the rest of the UAE and indeed to the rest of the region. And we're going to be talking about JAFZA in the broader regional context. After that, I'd like to touch on JAFZA and the Dubai World Expo because there's some pretty interesting information about that expo and the way in which JAFZA will be involved in it. And I'd lastly like to wrap up by taking some questions from the floor. But before we get there, I guess, I just wanted to chat a little bit about why we're giving this webinar today. Well, essentially, my special guests, Alex Allen and Kim Winter from the Logistics Executive Group, and I decided that it would be a great idea to make people aware of some of the amazing opportunities that are on offer at the Jebel Ali Free Zone. We know that this is a very special place, but we also know that most Australian companies aren't really particularly aware of JAFZA and everything that is on offer. And the people who are going to be talking to you about JAFZA today know an awful lot about it. So essentially, the big question for us today is, why should I set up at JAFZA? So to talk about JAFZA today and why you should set up, we've got two special guests, as I mentioned. First is Alex Allen, who is the Vice President of Consulting Services for Australia, the Middle East, and the Jebel Ali Free Trade Zone, JAFZA Dubai, and Kim Winter, who is the owner and CEO of the Logistics Executive Group. And me, Cynthia Deeren, I will be interviewing both Kim and Alex and talking to them about JAFZA and why you might want to think about setting up there. Let me give you a little bit of background on both Alex and on Kim. As I mentioned, Alex is the Vice President of Consulting Services with the Logistics Executive Group. Essentially, Alex heads LEG's International Trade Consulting Services, and his key focus is trade with JAFZA and the MENA region. Alex's background is that he's a logistics and supply chain specialist, and he has huge experience working in the international global logistics and supply chain industry. Alex has also operated businesses in the Middle East and Australia, and he's held senior leadership and executive roles for leading companies in the logistics and supply chain industry. So Alex, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Cynthia.
And Kim Winter is the owner and CEO of the Logistics Executive Group, which operates from over 12 locations internationally. The Logistics Executive Group provides corporate advisory, full life cycle executive talent management services, and logistics and supply chain training. Kim has been a dual resident of Dubai and Australia for more than 15 years, and he's JAFZA's official representative for both Australia and New Zealand. Kim has also been involved in a number of disaster and humanitarian logistics initiatives, and very impressively, he's the founder of the not-for-profit organisation www.oasisafrica.net. So Kim, welcome to today's session. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Just for a little bit more background, Alex is currently in Dubai, where he's spending some time at JAFZA. So for anybody who's got burning questions about what it's like in Dubai right this moment, Alex will be able to answer all those. And Kim has just jetted in from Dubai a few days ago, and he is joining us from Queensland. So we've got a couple of people on the Eastern Australian time zone and one in Dubai. But let's get started. Our first question for today is, why the UAE? Now, I'm sure that most people on this webinar already know that the UAE is one of the most stable and prosperous places in the Middle East. But if you're an Australian exporter, there are lots of places that you can go that are closer to home. So I'm interested in talking about what it is about the UAE that makes it a market which Australian exporters should be considering. And Alex, I wonder whether you'd just like to kick us off on this question. Why should we be looking at the UAE as a market?
Sure. The UAE has come a long way in the last 10 plus years. It's become the most prominent gateway, particularly for the Middle East regions, Africa and India. We've got quite a bit of a population here that is not only self-generating, but it's adding numbers year on year in the thousands. Just last year alone, we had 46,000 new job seekers that arrived in the UAE.
Wow.
To set up shop here and set up residence.
Yeah.
So strategically speaking, Dubai particularly has made itself available to the world.
Yeah.
To get business up and running as easily and as smoothly as possible, to penetrate markets not only within the GCC, but also the Indian and African subcontinent. So it's a great place to come. It's a great place to invest. It's a very safe place, and they're very welcoming of foreign investment.
Fantastic. And Kim, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, not other than the fact that the UAE, and in particular Dubai, and specifically JAFZA, is recognised as one of the great, and historically so, one of the great logistics and supply chain hubs of the world.
Yeah.
The JAFZA was set up in the 80s as the world's first genuine tax-free economic zone, specifically around manufacturing and supply chain, and it has been attempted to be replicated all around the world and also throughout the Middle East, but it's had the early wave of commencement. It is the geographic hub. If you take America out of the globe for a minute, then Dubai is the central hub for into, as Alex said, India, right throughout Asia, down into the Asia Pacific, up into Europe and down into Africa.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about the region also is that it is a region where pretty much it's recognised after Asia as the fastest growing up and coming middle class population in the world.
Yeah,
within 6 hours, I think it's a 2.2 billion population, about a third of the world's population.
Wow, that's pretty impressive statistic, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And based around it also, sorry Alex, is the fact that the GDP for this broader region, the MENA, Middle East, North Africa region in particular, is running somewhere in the area of about 4.8, 5.2%, some in that area. So not quite at the level of China at 7%, but very much, a big growth area. And as Alex said, a lot of population growth.
Yeah, yeah. That's
just to add to that, Cynthia, the logistics executive group and Brian Cartwright's the regional MD for our group here. And if you talk to Brian on the kind of stats that have come about, particularly in the last 24 months or so, you'll see that Dubai is fast becoming not just a power in its own right, but the line within the Middle East that's creating opportunities, employment, and social welfare. Not just within the UAE region, but certainly encompassing the broader GCC MENA region.
Yeah, absolutely. And, those are all really positive reasons for Australian companies to think about establishing themselves in the UAE as part of their strategy for greater regional engagement. I'd like to go on now and start to get a bit of a feel for what JAFZA is exactly. We know that JAFZA is a free trade zone, and we also know that it's the largest trade and tax-free zone in the world, and that it has direct access to lucrative and growing markets. But Kim, I was wondering whether you could give us a bit of a feel for JAFZA. I mean, could you tell us, for example, where is it exactly? How long has it been around for? You mentioned the 80s. I think it maybe started about 1985. Could you talk a little about the major industries it serves, and also what's it like there? What kind of facilities and services are available for people who are considering setting up at JAFZA?
Okay, thanks, Cynthia. So, look, a quick snapshot, folks. Jebel Ali Free Zone is, for those of you who have been to Dubai, and many have, of course, care of our friends of Emirates, making it such a hub in the world, and I think they're ranking either 1 or 2 against Heathrow globally on a week-to-week basis. They're having a battle with them currently about who's number 1 in the world in terms of passenger throughput through the airport. But JAFZA is based at Jebel Ali, surprisingly enough, for its name, which is about a 30-minute drive from Dubai Airport, Dubai Passenger Airport, and it's heading towards Al Nahyan Road, Sheikh Zayed Road to Abu Dhabi. It's about a 60-kilometre fenced-in customs tax tariff-free zone.
Yeah.
It is directly built around and spawned from Jebel Ali Port. Yeah. One of the world's biggest port companies, DP World, of course, is based there. Global headquarters is based there. DP World is part of JAFZA, as is DWC, which is the new Dubai World Central Airport, which is 5 times larger than the current Dubai airport.
Yes.
That sounds staggering. It is staggering. It's not fully developed, but it will be 5 times as big. When we come to talk about Expo will be Expo 2020, will be held within the JAFZA confines. JAFZA has 7,400 businesses within its confines.
Yes.
As I said, one of the world's very first tax-free zones to encourage trade in that area, but it's, of course, now it's a global phenomenon and global hub. Within that 7,400, it's a focus around construction, oil and gas, manufacturing, logistics, supply chain. It's one of the world's biggest re-export hubs. So I think only probably about 20% of what comes into JAFZA stays in JAFZA. The rest is re-exported to various parts of the world. The industries I've just mentioned, the facilities are nothing short of fantastic for an industrial and business zone. It has facilities for all the way through from major industrial complexes and warehouses and distribution centres, manufacturing plants. There's petroleum processing in there on the heavy industry down on one side, and then there's more light industry to retail. There's a techno park in there, specifically delegated towards technology and IT, up towards the Dubai World Central New Airport, which is also the home of the famous Dubai Air Show, which I went to for the first time this year, which was simply staggering in its own right in its scale and complexity. In that entire region, you can have a warehouse, you can have manufacturing site, you can have a showroom, you can have a small office, you can have a desk, or you can have a virtual office like Servcorp or Regis inside that environment. So there's something for everybody to have your registration or your licenses there, and there's a multiplicity of the ways that you can set up from a very, very low cost operation to a substantial operation where you can have up to a 100-year lease and they get 50-year guarantees on lease conditions.
So, Kim, do you think it would be fair to say that JAFZA is more geared towards, I guess, heavy industry and that sort of larger industrial end of the scale, or does it service a broad range of different kinds of industries?
No, it doesn't, and I apologise if I gave that impression, but there is some heavy industry from the early days. The vast majority, other than the construction side, is angled towards retail and FMCG. So you've got a lot of house white goods going through there, you've got a lot of food manufacturing and development in there, you've got a lot of bottling, food and beverage in there as well, you've got recycling, but a really big centre for food, fresh food, production, processing, distribution, both on a local and a wider base. And also, as I say, Techno Park is very heavily focused on technology, research and development. There's a whole designated tender zone there. Those newer areas are quite picturesque. The facilities are fantastic. They've just built a brand new 400-bed hotel there. They've got theaterettes, they've got conferencing facilities, there's employment that you can hire people on site, there's tens of thousands of people actually living on the site in terms of employment capability there, so skilled and non-skilled labour.
Thank you, Kim. I should just mention at this point that if you're on the webinar with us today and you have a question, please feel free to put it into the chat box on your screen so that we've got a bit of time to look at all those questions and organise them, and then we will talk about those in about the last 20 minutes of the webinar or so. So if you do have something that springs to mind, either for me or for Kim or for Alex, please just go ahead and type it in there, and we will come back to you and put it to our panel a bit later on. So Alex, I'm going to come back to you now. I wanted to have a bit of a chat about JAFZA and the UAE economy, and we have talked a little about that, but could you just comment for us a bit further and just expand on how JAFZA has contributed to the UAE economy over the last few years?
Yeah, sure. Dubai's trade in 2013 hit $390 billion.
Wow.
And JAFZA's trade as a contributor, as a single key contributor overall, was $90 billion US. Wow. So when you take those numbers and put them in perspective, you can see the impairment that JAFZA has within the Dubai economy, and particularly with international trade. And I must point out that JAFZA stands for Jebel Ali Free Zone Authority, so they're a direct government-owned subsidiary.
Yeah.
The reason they did that a few years ago was to give JAFZA its own economy and to give JAFZA its own trading rights that would attract foreign investment. And if you looked at the vision even 10 years ago and what JAFZA looked like to what it is today, $90 billion is staggering in probably a little bit more than a decade.
Yeah.
So that's phenomenal. I must also add that in relation to its hub status, it's fairly strategically positioned, as we know.
Yeah.
It's got great sea, air, and land accessibility, as Kim pointed out, for the 2.2+ billion consumers in the region.
Absolutely. And listen, we'll come back and talk about the logistics and the connectivity in a moment, because we have got some other slides about that. But that is really helpful to know. I think generally speaking, I've got a pretty clear picture of what JAFZA is like. So I'd now like to turn to this specific question of why and how Australian companies should consider setting up in JAFZA. So let's start with the who. Kim, could you just tell us a bit about which kinds of companies from Australia you think should be considering JAFZA as a home in the UAE?
Okay. Thanks, Cynthia. Well, look, recently I led a trade delegation by the global VP for sales from JAFZA. When was that, Alex? Earlier this year.
That was in April this year.
Yeah, and also the APAC regional head for sales as well. Two very significant players in the market in JAFZA, and great guys, by the way. Fantastic to work with some of the people from JAFZA. They're highly motivated, very highly accredited, educated in some of the world's best universities. They really are the jewels in the crown of some of the Dubai's up-and-coming executives. And we did a tour of Australia and New Zealand. We saw about 400 companies at about 7 different seminars over about a 10-day period. And quite frankly, from that mix, I gained a lot of confidence after being appointed last year as the representative of Logistics Executive Group to represent JAFZA in Australia and New Zealand, which we're very proud of being appointed. We didn't seek that appointment. They sought us out for various reasons. And it occurred to me, I had some set ideas that it would be certain industry sectors, but it became very clear on that trip that there's really no industry type or business type that JAFZA cannot cope with.
Right.
Quite frankly, all the way through from retail, we've seen some amazing organic, boutique sort of food products. Right, we saw this at Gulf Food, remarkably with a huge contingent from Australia, through your ex-colleagues, Cynthia from your Austrade days, DBAT days, arranged for hundreds of delegates from Australia. I do recommend to any listeners today on the webinar to speak to us about coming to Gulf Food in particular, or to the Big Five, which is the construction conferences. And the conferences, folks, you need to understand up there are on a mega scale. For those of you who've been to some of the bigger conferences around the world, Dubai is a class tier 1 act in regards to these conferences. They have hundreds of thousands of people attending their conferences around Dubai, and in particular heading down to JAFZA. So the answer to that is any type of food in particular, I think is highly attractive. Distribution there, some really remarkable. Food is a big mover. Food security. I've managed a number of conferences in the last couple of years on food security. 90-something, 8%, I think, Alex, of food is imported into the UAE in particular.
That's right.
And also similar to the region.
That is actually right,
so
Kim.
Food, and you would know that from Oil Trade Go. So, manufactured products, specialty products, what are we good at in Australia, and for that matter in New Zealand? The world wants to see it. And JAFZA is a fantastic entry place into the much broader MENA, North Africa, India, through the Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, all the way through that region, and all the way down into here, as I said. So wide variety. I really have not come across a business yet, and we're signing up businesses on a week-to-week basis in there currently as part of our relationship with JAFZA as their representative of all sorts of incredibly interesting types of businesses out of Australia.
I'm just looking at that slide we've got up there now, which shows some of the companies that are in JAFZA. There are a lot of big names there.
Yes, there are, and I think that there's a massive imbalance. I think there's something like about $2.2 billion worth of trade done out of Australia into the UAE, and you'll be able to correct me on that if I'm wrong. But I think the other way around is about 3.2 billion, mainly petrochemical products from the UAE into Australia. So there's a massive opportunity there. The UAE enjoys trade, has a very strong political and diplomatic relationship, which you'd no doubt was a big part of building in your career with the Australian government. But they do enjoy. Emiratis are one of the biggest populations for education in Australia, traditionally through the Gold Coast and now right throughout Australia. Cynthia, you probably have the numbers, but it's a big number that where these students come to Australia for education. So education is one of our biggest products. Education is one of our biggest exports, by the way, up there with Wollongong University and a range of other universities based up in Dubai. So very lucrative areas of industry.
Absolutely. Just thinking about all these opportunities that are out there for Australian companies at the moment, I'm wondering whether either of you would just like to point out what you think are the advantages of setting up in JAFZA as compared to, for example, just setting up outside JAFZA in the UAE.
Yeah, sure. I think I can answer that one, Cynthia. Some of the main attractions to set up in JAFZA is the fact that it's 100% foreign ownership.
Yeah.
So your business has no restrictions whatsoever in setting up and operating freely, in opposed to setting up a JV on the mainland, if you like, which generally operates at a 49-51 percentage principle.
Yes.
So the advantages of setting up in JAFZA, are quite attractive. Not only do they support you with, the world's best business services and technological backup, you're also able to have no personal or corporate tax. So there's a zero personal and corporate tax. You can repatriate capital profits back to your country of origin.
Yep.
There are no recruitment restrictions. So the visas in JAFZA are a lot more relaxed. The conditions for the visas are a lot more relaxed than what you'd find on the mainland.
Yes.
And then you've got a currency issue that, again, attracts certain currency fluctuations on the mainland, but you can certainly do quite a bit of hedging and those type of scenarios. So your currency is fairly safe. Again, there's no restrictions on the type of currency you bring into JAFZA. So there's quite a few advantages. JAFZA is also the one-stop shop, and as Kim indicated earlier, they provide you with everything from your hotel accommodation on site to your meeting facilities. You've got integrated sort of models within the business community itself. You've got cafes on site. You've got banks on site, post offices on site. It's like its own little postcode, its own little zone. It's an eco community within the broader UE community.
Yeah. So I'm just curious. Sorry, Kim. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Just to add to that as well, Alex. I think you'd agree that and you've been living and working up there over the last decade, as I have. The difference between Dubai as a city, for example, but also specifically JAFZA, is that this entire city has been set up to trade. And even since the very, very early days, biblical times in fact, Dubai was a trading port.
Yes.
And the original pieces of this are all still there, preserved. It's quite unique. JAFZA itself is highly tuned to making international trade and the JAFZA as a trade gateway painless and seamless. They've specifically set out recognising the challenges of dealing with India, dealing with China, dealing with Saudi Arabia, for example, where there are much stricter and more difficult bureaucracies, shall we say, to deal with. JAFZA and Dubai as a city, under His Royal Highness Sheikh Mohammed, is set out to be an open and friendly cultural and specifically a business environment for the world to come and enjoy. They built a dream, and people in actual fact did come. Yes, sure, during the GFC, it fell off the cliff a little bit, but a lot of infrastructure has been and bureaucratic program has been put in place to make sure that the stumbling block they hit, or the speed hump they hit in 2009, doesn't happen again. And people should realise that what Dubai is actually selling, and JAFZA is selling, is security, as mentioned earlier, is ease of access, and a very, very friendly business environment, not to mention no tax.
Which are all really huge pluses, I think, when you're trying to export your stuff around the world. On that point, I'm just wondering whether you could run us through in a couple of minutes how you would go about kicking off the process of setting up at JAFZA if you were thinking of setting up there, and a rough idea of how long you would expect to take to go from that first initial meeting to actually walking in the door of your new office at JAFZA.
Sure. Want me to answer that one, Alex?
Yeah, go for it, Kim.
Okay. Look, it really is quite simple, everybody. In fact, if there is any expression of interest, then we'll engage with you. There's a very simple, what is called an investor guide. It has a very, very simple diagrammatic. We can send you this by Dropbox. You can be reading it within, today and moving forward with it. But the first steps are identifying just what sort of registration best suits your business. And JAFZA staff, as well as ourselves as representatives, Alex and myself as trained representatives, are well trained to help you identify the easiest, most direct and cost down measure of setting up. And by and large, you're talking a few $1,000s here and there, not hundreds of thousands of dollars. Biggest advantage is, of course, you can own 100% of what you're doing there. But there is a range of options. There's probably half a dozen simple options, and it is obvious after a 10-minute conversation what sort of registration you should be undertaking, what sort of license you should be undertaking, and what best suits your business. And bearing in mind that JAFZA is very user-friendly in terms of understanding that companies want to set up for as little cost as possible and then grow. And as you grow, you may need to change your license, your type of facilities, the amount of space that you need. There's no locking into 5 or 10-year contracts. Everything's understood to be fluid, to be able to understand growth and to facilitate more opportunity for you, both in terms of space and in the types of arrangements that you have there commercially. So setting up is really a painless exercise. We do it all the time. Alex and myself advise on this and advise on a range of other both cultural, business and business connection capabilities for people. It's a simple process of following the coloured diagrams, really, quite frankly, in the investor guide. which we have hard copies and you can get online. And then going through the staff, you'll be allocated there's a remarkable bloke called Jeffrey Zhu, who's Chinese. He's an exceptional customer champion inside. He services the APAC region. Anybody who'd be setting up would be dealing for us, and then ultimately with Jeffrey. There's nothing he doesn't know. He's been there for 7 or 8 years, and he's there to help. And we just put through quite a challenging setup for a company that had a very unusual product out of New Zealand that required a fair degree of certification because it's to do with drugs and food. And he was remarkable during that process. We've just finished walking through that process last week. So really, it's a simple process. It's just colour by numbers. It's designed to be easy. It's designed to be flexible. It's designed for it to cost you as little as humanly possible. And
are we talking a few weeks to do that process, Kim?
Absolutely, yeah. And no question. And in fact, JAFZA like to talk about the fact you can now do it off the app on your mobile phone,
right.
which technically you can.
Yeah.
It always helps to engage with humans, of course, and there's always questions that you need to ask. So, we don't muck around with that. We always say there's a customer agent to discuss with you once we've gone through the initiation process and the validation process. Alex is a highly regarded consultant in the freight sector over many years out of Australia anyway, so he's used to consulting and advising on all of these activities anyway. But having the backup inside of JAFZA, where Alex and I spend a lot of time, we're just meeting a few days ago before I flew here to Cairns for this conference, walk people through down the path on this every day.
Absolutely, and look, that's a great segue to go back to Alex. Alex, as we've mentioned, you are a supply chain and logistics expert, and I was wondering whether you could just tell us a bit about JAFZA and land and rail connectivity, because obviously once you're set up there, getting your goods to market out of the zone and into other countries is really important. Could you just talk us through how you go about doing that?
Yeah, sure. Look, as mentioned earlier, JAFZA itself houses, and as Kim indicated, DP World's, which is probably one of the world's largest port facility services, represented in, I believe, most parts of the world. You've also got DWC, which is World Central, and Dubai Airports, which is going to be, as Kim indicated, 4 or 5 times the size of the current airport. And, to add to that, because of its strategic nature and its placements, Dubai and the UAE, for that matter, has become quite accessible, again, for the rest of the GCC and the Turkey region with a very new innovative project called Etihad Rail. And Etihad Rail is a legacy project. And if I can give you just some quick stats on it, the Dubai, the UAE government has already, put $25 billion towards this project.
Yes.
It's going to improve and transform business, social, logistics, and the transportation landscape.
Yeah.
We're going to have connectivity, right from the top end of the UAE all the way up to Turkey. So when you consider, and everything in between, so when you consider, again, the amount of countries and borders that this railway is going to connect through,
yeah.
all of a sudden you're dealing with a whole new economy, and you're dealing with, trade surpluses and increased tourism and increased logistics. JAFZA Jebel Ali Port is considered amongst the top 10 busiest ports in the world, as is the Dubai Airport. And I'll give you some quick stats on the type of numbers that actually move through Jebel Ali Port. You're talking 20 million odd TEUs per annum, and TEU stands for 20-foot equivalent units. So there's 40 foot FEUs and TEUs. You've got 130 airlines that go through Dubai's airports. You've got 170 shipping lines. You've got every bank in the world is represented here. There's 70 banks in the world that are represented within Dubai and have accessibility through JAFZA.
Yes.
You're dealing with Dubai, or UAE's population in itself is close to, Dubai's population is 2.2 mil. The UAE's population is close to about 9.5 mil.
Yeah.
There's 200 nationalities represented here. They've got an average of 10 million visitors that come through a year. So when you consider logistics and what it can actually do for companies that want to set up here, I don't think there's any better setup in the world with as much accessibility as what the JAFZA free zone provides you into the Middle East and the surrounding regions.
Absolutely, and when you consider that there are 360 million consumers in the region at the moment, which is projected to grow or even about double by 2050, that's a fairly exciting prospect, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I would consider amongst all the free zones in the world, JAFZA would be probably the pioneer on so many fronts. They've encouraged business to come and set up here where the restrictions are, basically non-existent. They're very flexible. They're very welcoming. They have a very simple methodology in their application. They look after you well whilst you're on site. So anything to do with the Dubai government, anything to do with the GCC MENAT region, they've got facilitators on site to help you and assist. There's a combination of different industries that come together on site yet again at JAFZA and share ideas and share business visions and strategies to try and extrapolate as much as they can out of this huge opportunity of Dubai's central location and the UAE strategically placed as a transport hub in the region.
Alex, thank you. Now we've got about 5 minutes left before we go into question time, so I'm going to keep moving along. I was just wondering, Alex, whether there was anything else that you wanted to say about JAFZA in a regional context.
JAFZA in a regional context, I would say, is the place to come if you're going to set up as an overseas venture. And there's many benefits we've already discussed, but through Logistics Executive Group, we're very proud to be associated with the JAFZA connection, and we're here ready, willing and able to assist any Australian companies and New Zealand companies or anyone else that require any on-the-ground support, initial inquiries, or any type of overview of the potential that JAFZA can bring to their business. We are, as I said earlier, available. Our contact details are on the screen at the end of this session, and we'd be happy to assist.
Thanks so much, Kim. Now, I do want to mention briefly before we go into question time, JAFZA and the Dubai World Expo 2020. Probably most of the people on this webinar already know that last year in November, Dubai won the right to host World Expo 2020. And you might also know that that's had a very positive impact on the economic climate in the UAE. What I'd like to know from Kim is, Kim, can you comment on how you see preparations for the Expo affecting trade in the UAE and especially what goes on at JAFZA as we move towards that event?
Sure, thanks, Cynthia. Well, in fact, it may be some surprise that, and I don't know how many on the webinar really do know much about expos, but funnily enough, around the world, and I'm circulating around our 12 offices around the world all the time, a lot of people aren't that aware of these trade expos that occur. They're like the Olympics, and I think they're every 4 years or so. But they really are for the countries that have them, like the Trade Olympics.
Yes. And
Dubai was up against, I think, Russia, Brazil, Turkey, Spain, and a bunch of other companies, and they won out against all odds. And it's a little bit unlike the Olympics, where depending on how much money you're going to pay off to some country's representative somewhere as to whether you win it or not, it really is upfront on trade. It was a remarkable win for the region and specifically for the Dubai government, who has made remarkable progress, as Alex has talked about, over recent decades.
Yeah.
Look, Expo 2020 is massive. They're talking something in the order, and I stand to be corrected on some of these numbers, but I think it's about 250,000 jobs. I think it's big picture numbers only, talking here something in the order of $25 billion in infrastructure investment. Alex and I were up there. We held our own Logistics Executive Group World Conference at JW Marriott, and I can highly recommend that venue, very good pricing and world-class service, last week with our global colleagues. And just in the Business Bay region alone, In the last 2 years, there's something like about 40 skyscrapers. When we're talking skyscrapers, you're talking about over 60 stories in that one precinct. In the last year, since it was pretty much announced, the last few months it's been announced, though they were leading up to it, there's been something like about 19 or 20 major global level infrastructure projects announced in the billion plus space. So this is not only a massive investment inside of Dubai, including hotels. Alex, I stand to be corrected. Is it something like 300 hotels or something?
Absolutely.
Amazing number like that? Something 250 to 300 hotels, not room night beds, but hotel, being built between now and 2020. As I said, the JAFZA site will host the Expo 2020. And of course, like all of these things around the world, as they've been in the past, the new, the latest, it'll be bigger and better than Ben-Hur. It'll be just massive. The investment opportunity offshore for investors from countries like Australia is also significant. As a window to the world that goes there, not only for this region, but to the world, it's a massive opportunity. So great investment opportunity to get in early, to be registered in the UAE, to have a business established, to take advantage of what will flow from just the passenger numbers alone. I think they're looking to increase their intake of aircraft and passengers by twofold, 100% almost by 2020. And given the growth that's already taken place, these numbers are staggering. I don't have at hand on me, somebody else may, in terms of passenger numbers, but Alex alluded to some numbers a bit earlier on. So Expo 2020, you can see by driving down the road when I drive to work every morning there, and my office is only 7 minutes from JAFZA, and I'll probably be opening an office in JAFZA myself because the opportunities are so great, or we will, as the Logistics Executive Group, opening an office here just to service the JAFZA business as an extension of the business that we've already been established up there for 10 years that Brian Cartwright runs as our Managing Director for Middle East and Africa, who I think is on this call also. So massive opportunity, both in terms of around Expo 2020. I guess the thing I want to button off here with is the fact that anybody looking to do business within that wider North Africa, bearing in mind North Africa is Africa is now up around 4.5 to 5% GDP growth a year as well, and with one of the world's fastest growing expendable income middle class populations, the way that China did 10 years ago. Africa is still a very dark horse in a lot of world economics, but trust me, Africa is booming in it, and Dubai is one of the big hubs, or if not the big hub, to service West, North and East Africa. In regards to JAFZA itself, around the Expo 2020, companies around the region genuinely don't like doing business if you haven't made a commitment to be at least registered or have a license to do business in and around the UAE. So by being there at low cost, establishing now, it will open many doors around the opportunities, both of construction, food, manufactured goods, specialty items, a lot of companies with health products, beauty products, pharmaceuticals. A lot of companies out of Australia producing these world-class goods at the tier one, the very best quality of products coming off the land in Australia. Now,
Kim and Alex, we've actually got some specific questions from the floor, so I'm going to ask you both whether you would have a go at answering these. I'm going to start with Emma, and Emma has asked, in regard to food, is JAFZA a good platform for exporting differentiated goods aimed at a luxury market?
Absolutely, I'll take that one. Look, in relation to food, I don't think there's any better place in the world that welcomes food in any shape or form. Dubai's got some of the best restaurants in the world. You find some of the best products in every supermarket shelves, and there's a very deep range of a variety of goods that are specifically available in this part of the world that you just don't find in other parts of the world. So to answer Emma's question, Dubai is very welcoming, not just within the UAE but also within GCC for any food export items. We have the Gulf Food fair that's on every year, where you have massive amounts of attendees. As Kim indicated earlier, hundreds of thousands of people want to attend this. There's a whole market for luxury items. There's special fairs that Dubai organises. I've lost count as to how many, but there's a few hundred fairs and exhibitions a year that Dubai hosts that covers the food product and covers luxury goods in a way that you have not seen before. So the answer is yes, and the market for that is booming. We've got lots of Australian companies have already set up here and wanting to set up here. In Carmen's Foods is one. You'd find breakfast cereals and on the supermarket shelf. They've entered the market here in a big way. You've got luxury goods such as leather products coming out of Australia, woolen garments. You've got a lot of sporting accessories that are coming here, top end, high end names that are coming here and setting up here because the market's so accessible. So absolutely, and if there's more questions that anyone would like around that answer, be happy to on a separate line.
Okay, Alex, thanks so much. I've got a question here from Mark, and Mark would like to know whether businesses outside the free zone see any disadvantages in dealing with businesses inside the free zone.
Kim, you want to take this?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for that question, Mark. And the answer to that is no. And in fact, JAFZA is specifically set up as a hub or a landing point of imported goods to be distributed both into the wider UAE, to Dubai, UAE, the GCC, the Gulf region, and into the MENA wider region in that order. So it really is an amalgam of opportunity, and a lot of companies find that once they bring their goods into JAFZA and then re-export the goods back out, it seems to be exporting from JAFZA into Dubai. If you're like 10 metres across the wire, then they test their market in that region, and then they go wider into, again, that wider 2.2 billion population, which is 6 hours by flight from that hub. So, look, specifically, Mark would be interested to hear about what you're dealing with, what sort of product you've got, what sort of service you might have. We could then obviously answer more specifically. And harking back to yourself, Emma, thanks again for your question. I'd just like to add to that as well. I've personally been asked, and we're just not in a position as Logistics Executive Group, even though we have corporate advisory is part of what we do, executive search is a big part of what we do, and our education piece is another pillar. We're just not set up to facilitate distribution of products. The last Gulf Food, I had about a dozen offers to set up a company to distribute things from, honeys, organic, world-class, tier 1 organic honeys, one from West Australia who've still got some pots of their honey, they still haven't got a distributor for whatever reason. Quality products, bath products, competitors to the perfumes and those sorts of candles and those sorts of quality products, because we do produce such absolutely top-class product off the land in Australia. These products are high demand by the population, not just the Emiratis. We have a very fine eye for quality goods in the retail and FMCG space, as well as luxury and fashion goods, consumables and wearable fashion, but also right across, as Alex said, into the recreational space as well, which is a really big booming area in the Middle East and amongst Emiratis, but also realising there's a very high number of high net worth expatriates in this region and within Dubai and around the Jubilee area in particular, like throughout the UAE.
Fantastic. Now, Cassandra Lee would like to know whether there are any challenges or benefits to hiring staff based in JAFZA as opposed to other locations in Dubai or the UAE.
Kim?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that, Cassandra. The answer to that is no. And it'll all sound, I know, folks, a little sound good to be true, and we're saying everything's fantastic. The reality is it is, and our reputations are at stake on the basis of this, and you can read our profiles. We've been up there in very senior roles for a very long time, so we actually can speak with some authority. But thanks, Cassandra, no issues whatsoever. And in fact, because of the engagement we have, and because I'm personally linked now as the as the personal representative on behalf of the Logistics Executive Group to JAFZA, which Alex mentioned is a 100% government-owned entity, and the biggest entity of the Dubai government, being 22% of the GDP of Dubai, as Alex said, $90 billion last year. We work in JAFZA all the time. To be employed in JAFZA is no different. It just so happens that if you were with a company that is based in JAFZA, your license, your employment license, which we all have, employment visas and licenses, that would be your home base. But we all have a home base somewhere. Mine happens to be in Knowledge Village, where our initial office was set up 10 years ago. But as I said, I may well have a license personally belonging to Jebel Ali, which is my home suburb, if you like, or my home location, or city within a city. So no problems at all. Jebel Ali is on the end of a 6-lane brand new highway going directly into Jebel Ali from Sheikh Zayed Road, which to any of you will know is the iconic single largest road in the United Arab Emirates. Absolute pleasure to drive on at up to 160 kilometres an hour. Yeah, it's no problem.
Not legally.
Working in there or outside of it.
All right. Thank you very much. I think those are all the questions that we have for the time being, and we're coming very close to the end of our time. So I'm going to start wrapping up, but I would like to mention that if anybody does have questions, the details of the presenters today, or me, the presenter, and our special guests are on the screen, and you're free to contact any of us directly with your questions, and we will get back to you on those. I'd also just like to mention that both Deeren and Associates and the Logistics Executive Group have groups and company pages on LinkedIn. So if you're keen to follow what we're doing, do go and check those locations out. And you know, we'd love you to join in and follow along with all of our news. Look, it's been a pleasure to host this webinar today. I'm very pleased to be working with the Logistics Executive Group, and I'm very pleased to have had the opportunity to provide some information about JAFZA and the opportunities that it provides for Australian companies. We're going to be running a series of these webinars on Dubai and the UAE, and also on World Expo 2020 over the coming months. So I encourage you to keep your eye out for those. Deeren and Associates will be putting out notifications about those webinars as we plan them and as they come up. We'll be sending out a summary of today's webinar to the people who registered and came along. And I'd just like to thank you all for joining us. So, Kim, thank you very much for your time, and welcome back to Australia. And Alex, thank you for your time, and I hope that the rest of your stay up in Dubai is profitable and a lot of fun.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Thanks for everybody on the webinar. We'll be in touch soon.
Okay.
Cheers, bye.